Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bible and Archaeology Live Friday, free for all. We are coming to you live here on Friday as we are normally. Today, it's been a new year. I don't know what position the moon is in, interfering with the internet waves and all these things. It's been a morning of technical things. So if you're here with us live and you can hear us, or if you can't hear us, be sure to let us know so that we can see if you're here and you're like, I can see you flapping your lips and nothing is coming out, then maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you feel about us today. But let us know if you can't. But Bob, happy Friday, happy first Friday of the year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year from everyone here at Bible and Archaeology. We
Yeah.
really appreciate everyone who shows up live, everybody who's been listening. It's been a big year for us with all kinds of different things that we have been doing. We're coming up to a year of podcast episodes. So it's been a bit of a change for us, coming into this. I think this is episode 51. We started doing lives last year. I guess that would be next week. That'll be 52 for us. So people can hear us. We're good. Thank you so much, Noah and Purple Owl. Thank you for letting us know. We really appreciate that. But we're coming up to a year back on a live to celebrate the year
hmm
round. Bob, it's been a crazy year.
It has been a crazy year. It's been a fantastic year, and I just want to start by saying thank you to all of our supporters, to all of our subscribers, to all of our viewers. We surpassed 126,000 subscribers. So remember, at the turn of last year, we passed 100,000. We've kicked up another 25,000 subscribers, and that's in part to people who tune in, who watch, who support us. I just don't I can't say thank you enough to people who find this content interesting. I love teaching. This is what I do for a living here at the University of Iowa. Go Hawks! And but the fact that this content, we can make it public, we can make it available for free to people, and that they tune in and that they
Yeah,
find that we can make this available. We're not trying to be stuffy. We're not trying to be, too
I don't
posh.
know that we could be, Bob.
I
If we
yeah,
if we wanted to
it's not
pretend,
my style. It's not
yeah.
it's not this is something that I enjoy doing. It's important to take scholarly information and to make it available to the public, not just for young people, but for lifelong learners, for people who are interested in this content, who tune in, who watch whether if I'm on Netflix or History Channel, but also here on YouTube. I enjoy doing it. And Jordan, thank you to you for all of the hard work you put in nonstop. The most of this growth and this success is due to you, and for all of the things that
Well,
you do.
we've
You're
got
doing
great
a
people
wonderful
coming in.
job.
We've
You're
had
doing a
wonderful
great job.
guests. Well, and so some things, it's the beginning of the year, and everybody does their your goals for the new year, all these kinds of things. And so as we've been talking about some of the content over the year, what have we liked, what have we been making, and what do we want to do more of next year? And this is something that we're always interested in hearing from the listeners about. But some things that we're going to be making more of next year, the podcast isn't going anywhere. We're going to keep
Right.
doing those. We're going to have more kind of that scripted explainer style content that we love doing. It can be
Mhm.
a lot to do sometimes, but that's something you'll get more from us. And a new piece that we're going to continue expanding next year is that bonus content on Patreon. So
Yeah.
if you like the channel, if you're like, I love podcasts, I love your videos, I want bonus things, Patreon is going to continue to grow in that area. So we'll be having more bonus podcasts over on Patreon that may make their way eventually over to the feed for everybody, but Patreon exclusive
Right.
podcasts, bonus clips with guests where we ask them extra questions that will be just for you, questions that you might have for guests that are there. So there's going to be all kinds of new content for that Patreon audience. So if you want to
Mhm.
come over and join us there, the link is down in the description. There's lots of different tiers. You can get access to different things depending on
Right.
what you want. If you just want to show support, if you want early
Right.
access, if you want bonus content, if you want some exclusive access to
That's
extra calls and that kind of stuff, there's all kinds
right.
of things. So go and check that out there.
That's right. Some people just want to support us, and we really, really appreciate that. All the way back from our very first Patreon supporter, Tammy Casanova. So shout out to Tammy Casanova for supporting us on Patreon. But our Patreon supporters have been increasing in number. So thank you to all of you. And again, Jordan has laid out some different tiers. So if you want, some people just want to support us and say thanks. And again, it's the price of a cup of coffee per month. But other people are like, hey, I wonder what it's like to just hang out with these guys and just see,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean,
people do this when we go to the SBL conference every year. We'll go to the sessions and we'll talk and we'll try to be professional, but then we'll go hang out in the lobbies of these hotels or in these bars or restaurants or in between sessions, and you'll just see these scholars standing around just kind of shooting it, just kind of talking. And I wonder what it's like to just chat with them. I wonder, do they tell jokes? What do they talk about? That's what we're doing in these other tiers. It's just us talking about our favorite movies, or I think we did our favorite holiday movies, or
hmm
telling
we've
jokes,
yeah, and
things like that. There's
there's
stuff
all
that
kinds
maybe
of stuff.
it wouldn't make for a full episode. It wouldn't
Yeah.
make for a full podcast, but it's just us kind of outtakes sometimes. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, please please consider joining Patreon and supporting us in that way. And we're trying to give you some extra content. And we've got a new feature that we're getting ready to push, something that we've been working hard on, that a course that I teach every year here at the University of Iowa, and that we're getting ready to make available to all of you.
Well, so it is now available. We haven't publicized it too much, but Bob's class, based on Bob's book, The Cities That Built the Bible, the course is called Cities of the Bible, is available now on Patreon. So if you have read that book and you're like, I know, Bob, you've talked about that you teach this class at the University of Iowa. I'm not a student at the University of Iowa, and I'd love to be in the class, but I can't be. Or someone who might be interested and they might like the book, but maybe they're more interested in listening to some lectures. This is now something that anyone can have access to. So through the shop on our Patreon channel, the link is down there in the description if you want to go to our Patreon shop. You have access to Cities of the Bible with the lectures performed by Bob himself that we recorded for you. I think they came out looking really good. There's 8 hours, well, 8 different lectures.
Mhm.
The lectures themselves are 45 minutes to 50 minutes each. So like 7+ hours of content here. And there's a couple of different ways you can get into this. If you're like, I want all of the lectures, I want everything, there's that full class package for you that's available there. You can go in and sign up and buy all those. If you're like, I can look through and I just want to see a couple cities, we also have individual lectures available for you. So there's a wide range of cities that Bob talks about, things like Qumran and Rome and Babylon and Jerusalem. And maybe you just want one. No big deal. You can go in, you can sign up just for that one lecture and just buy that one. I would say if you're looking through and you see like, ooh, I like the names of 3 or 4 of these, if you're looking at the prices there, it might be worth your while to just buy that whole thing together. And
Mhm.
we do have an early bird discount code that I'm going to put in the description as well. It's Cities 20. Cities 20 will get you 20% off that full class package. So that brings that price down a little bit more, maybe, if you're looking at a couple. So Cities 20, 20% off for early bird listeners, podcast listeners like yourself, that you can go in and get that. So go and check it out. The link is down in the description. We're going to be doing more of this kind of online class stuff in the coming year. So if there are other things, specific topics, maybe they won't all be long 8 lecture kind of series. There can be
Right.
one-offs. So if there are particular topics that you would like more of a lecture style thing on, you can always let us know. Our email is there. Send us an email. We're happy to hear from you. We want to make content that you want to engage with. So that is something that is there now for you.
Right. And I see we got a question from Constellation Pegasus. I am going to
Yes.
come back to this question. We are going to get to the questions in a second, but I just want to say the course is basically how did we get the Bible that we have today, both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. And the course is essentially the thesis of the course is we need to look at the people that put the Bible together, and the way that you learn about the people is looking at the ancient cities that they built as representative of these different peoples. So
Mm-hmm.
as you look at the archaeology, you look at the history, you look at the different peoples, you look at ancient Babylon, you look at
Yeah.
Nineveh, you look at Ugarit, you look at the Phoenician cities. And as you learn the stories from the archaeology of these different peoples, you see how they contributed and the responses to those peoples, how that contributed to the Bible that we have today. And then you just work forward through time. You look at Athens and Alexandria and Rome and Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And by telling the story of the cities, you learn about how we got the Bible. And so if you're interested in something like that, or it would make a great gift, especially for a parent, a grandparent. What do I get my grandparents and grandparents, other than socks? ties,
Socks can be a great gift. I
Socks
got
are,
a great
hey,
pair of
that's all
socks
I
for
ever
Christmas.
asked for Christmas anymore, man. It's Iowa and it's cold,
Yeah.
but it's make a great gift for a church or a synagogue. It's something that you can buy. And of course, the book is set up in 13 chapters because it works for a good quarter, for an entire quarter. Works for like a one per week for a quarter. Also works for a television series. I'm just saying that's out there for history in case they're listening. But it's also the kind of thing that would make for a series of lessons. If you were going to teach a class, you could just use this. We're going to make available on Patreon some study guides and some value add materials. So again, Cities of the Bible, it's there available on Patreon. Please go check it out. If you're interested, you're welcome to purchase the course there.
Let's jump on. Constellation Pegasus has a question
Yeah,
here. And Constellation Pegasus, we thank you for your support, and we're glad you love the content. We hope that we can continue, making stuff that you like. Constellation Pegasus's question here is: I've been going over on Jesus saying people wouldn't die before the kingdom of heaven came. It never happened. It hits hard when realizing what Jesus said failed 3 different times. And so this is that statement of, yeah, the kingdom of heaven will come before these things. We also get
right,
this with Paul as well, when
right,
Paul talks about like the state of marriage. Stay in
right,
the state that you were called because things are going to come in this time.
right,
So, Bob, if I can add a thing onto this question as well, is how has that been interpreted over time? Because there's the reading here of like Jesus said this was going to happen and this didn't
right.
happen. This did
Sure.
not come true. There's
Right.
the different reading when people are like, "Ooh, maybe I'm uncomfortable with that
Yeah.
approach."
No,
How can you turn that into anything else?
that's the issue, right? Nobody likes it. And look, I was a student of Bill Schneidewin at UCLA, and he wrote the book on 2 Samuel 7, the promise to David, which says, there will always be a king on the throne in Jerusalem, son of David forever. And then 587 happens, the temple gets destroyed, Jerusalem gets destroyed, the Davidic, line ends. And then people are asking, what happens to this promise that God made to David? There would always be a son of David on the throne in Jerusalem. And now you got to wrestle with this problem. It looks like God broke his promise. So how do you deal with this? The same thing is happening in the New Testament, right? You've got this saying that says, there are some here who will not die before this return. It's called the imminent return, or the problem of the imminent return. The expectation was that this was going to happen and that the Son of God, Son of Man, would return quickly before
Mm-hmm.
some of the people who were standing there died. And so the dead in Christ, the people who had died right there, would raise back up, and those who were living would join them in the sky, and then we would have the return. And that didn't happen. And they were waiting and they were waiting. And then you have uh, this problem with people being idle. You have this
Yeah,
discussed by the Apostle Paul. I think it's in Romans, where you have people who just stopped working.
yeah.
Because
If it's
why
coming
should we
so
do
soon,
anything?
it's
If we're
vacation time.
Christians, if we're believers in this guy, why should we do anything that he's gonna come back? I shouldn't work. I shouldn't do it. I shouldn't make any money. I shouldn't invest. I'm just gonna stand here and wait for him to return. I have no care. Paul says, don't get married. Don't end your marriage. And it's because these guys were just like, I don't need to do anything. He's coming right back, right? And as time went on and he didn't return, the church leaders had to decide, okay, well, now what do we do? And this is when we begin to see that change beginning in, I don't want to say dogma or doctrine, but at the end of the first century, beginning of the second, they begin to set up rules for how these churches are going to run. And they don't necessarily match this radical teaching that Jesus taught, right? This just love everybody and, give away your stuff. And you start to see this. And then when you get into the second century, they have to deal with this idea that it's not that he's not coming back, but it's not as imminent as they thought. And so a lot of the changes are an attempt to wrestle, just like the Jews had to do with wrestling with the fact that God it appeared to break his promise, and now they have to reconcile this. The fact that Jesus didn't come back immediately.
Well, and I know one of the answers, growing up in a church community, when you're trying to deal with this thing, one of the answers I had been told is that equivalation of a day is like 1,000 years. And so, okay, when
Right.
Jesus is talking about this time span, is there maybe an unintentional mental slippage in the time span that Jesus is talking
Yeah.
about? And that, oh no, it's still true. We misunderstood the time scale that is being talked about here. And so this goes on to something different than what we had maybe initially understood. We just misunderstood. It's not wrong. We didn't understand it correctly.
That's one approach. A day is like 1,000 years, and you screw with the time. You say, what's a day to us? That's one way. Bobby Hill just made a comment here in the chat that I think is closer to what I think is going on, and that is, he says the answer from apologists is typically that prophecies are conditional, even if no conditions are given.
Yeah.
Now, that's exactly what happens in the Hebrew Bible to the promise to David, to God's promise to David in 2 Samuel 7. The promise is originally unconditional. This is David, you will not build me a house, I will build you a house, and there will be a son of David on the throne in Jerusalem forever. This is an unconditional promise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But when you start reading that a little later, it gets interpolated according to Schneidewin in 2 Samuel 7. But then you read it again in Chronicles. You read this as after the destruction of the temple, they have to come back and deal with the fact that it appears God didn't keep his promise. And so you get this insertion into the text that says, if you keep my commandments, and
Yeah.
if you don't go astray, and if the people continue to, these conditions get added to the promise so that when the temple does get destroyed, they can then point to the conditions and say, you didn't do what I asked you to do, so therefore I don't have to keep my end of the promise as well. As if God needs people to do something in order for him to keep his end of the promise. An all-powerful God doesn't need other people to keep conditions in order to exercise power. That's not the way it is. But they needed a rationale. And so they
Right.
needed these conditions added to it, at least to justify why God didn't apparently keep his end of the promise. And Bobby Hill's exactly right. And that's what goes on in the New Testament. He must have meant something else. He must have been hinting at something else. He must have something else planned, and we're just too small to understand it.
Right.
And that's been the dilemma in the first and second centuries up until this day.
When it's still the ongoing in trying to find that timeline. If you become timeline focused on this, of this is a clue for when these things are going to happen, that's what opens the door to those types of counting of words or messages. And this is the time, and this is the window, and 1,000 years, and these things that become these types of conditions that get brought in so that we can understand, or we haven't fulfilled something like the great commandment yet, and so that's what
Right.
is postponing this, because
Right.
the message hasn't yet reached individual X, Y, or Z. And so these things are holding back. So, Constellation Pegasus, thank you for your question, and thank you
Yeah.
for your support. It's a good question. And it's one of these difficult ones that we do see. You see it in the
Yeah.
Hebrew Bible happening, you see it in the New Testament happening. When you have something that seems to be, if straightforward,
Right.
it says this, and if that didn't come true, how do we deal with it?
Right.
That can present one of those ongoing difficulties.
And since we're on the new year and we're reflecting back, this is Janus, by the way. The Greek deity Janus had two faces. If you ever see a picture of Janus, uh, on the one on the back of his head looking backwards, one on the face looking forward. So Janus is able to look back and to look forward. And this is why the month January from Janus, it's the month that looks back into the old year and forward into the new year. But what I wanted to say is, as we do this, I wanted to give a special shout out to Constellation Pegasus, who, look at this again,
Yeah, the dates.
who
Yeah.
has been for this past year a very strong supporter of us. And I just wanted to give a special thank you to Constellation Pegasus. Thank you so much for the support that you've given us all year. It means a lot.
It means a lot.
We see it, we recognize it, we love your questions, and we just wanted to say a special thank you to you, Constellation Pegasus. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you for
yeah,
what you're doing.
and their comment here that the moving of the goalposts is absolutely one of these things. If you're trying to lock it down to specifics, to a specific date, which does become one of these big things for an insider and an outsider reading of, it's more common in those, I don't want to call it sectarian readings of things, but where there's that large focus on who has that special inside information. We know when this is going to happen. Those dates start to come in, and you'll see the billboards or the TV commercials or whatever that this is the date because we had a reading of how this came through. And then when it doesn't happen, there's a new revelation has come in, or we found a new verse, or something has changed this again to cause this to go to be read another way. Bob, I want to jump from Constellation Pegasus there onto kind of a thread of questions that I think is related from our recent top 10 video. So we
Okay.
do a top 10 list video every year, 10 of, and there's a lot of archaeological finds every year. So we
Right.
sift through that and we say, here are 10 that maybe you missed, maybe you didn't, but these are 10 finds that we think you should know about from this year. And our channel name is, right, Bible and Archaeology. And so as we're
Right.
going through that, we're presenting, 10 finds from the year. Comments on that video, a lot of
Right.
them, not all of them. There's a number of them that it's basically, I watched a couple minutes. How do these prove the Bible? Your name is Bible and Archaeology. This doesn't prove the Bible. This is talking about
Right.
coins, or this is talking about a
Right.
shipwreck. How are
Right.
you Bible and Archaeology? So could we take a moment here for
Sure.
maybe new viewers who are coming in January or
Sure.
found us from that video to talk about the name Bible and Archaeology? Because I think that top 10 list gives a great opening to kind of
Sure.
flesh this out for people.
Yeah. So when we were trying to decide what to name this channel, I mean, we thought about it for a very long time. And so a couple of things. One, I like names where the company says, the name says what the product does or is, right? So International Business Machines. Okay, that tells you what it does. It sells business machines internationally, right? IBM, right? Um, the company should the best names of companies are either really, really short and they're branded really well so you can tell them anywhere in the world, right? Nike, Apple, whatever. You know what it is they do. Or the name says what it does. And so Bible and Archaeology, the name says what it does. But we were very careful not to call it biblical archaeology because we wanted to talk about the Bible and biblical studies. So any issue pertaining to the Bible, questions that you see in here about biblical studies that may not have anything to do with archaeology. So we wanted to be able to address good old-fashioned biblical studies issues, anything having to do with biblical languages,
Mm-hmm.
things that aren't necessarily archaeological based. And we wanted to be able to talk about archaeology that may or may not have anything to do with the Bible. Meaning, the way we define, I don't want to say biblical archaeology, but the archaeology that we treat and address here on this channel is archaeology that takes place in the lands associated with the Bible.
And I
So it's
think that's
not
an
necessarily
important moment for to flesh
correct.
out for everybody.
Correct. It's the lands, it's the lands of the biblical peoples,
Yeah.
not necessarily uh, uh, direct correlation of biblical archaeology. So not everything that we cover is has this is something that King David did, or this is something that Zerubbabel did, or it's archaeology that takes place in the lands that are affiliated with basically the Eastern Mediterranean. So Egypt, North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, so Israel, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, ancient Persia, all of these places that we read about in the Bible, we're going to look at the archaeology of those places. The Turkey, all the way up in the, Italy, Greece, all the way up, all the way around. So it's not biblical archaeology, it's Bible and archaeology, and they're separate, but they're connected.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember is that this is not an apologetics channel. It's the opposite of that, if anything, right? So we're not out to disprove anything,
No.
right? We are out to educate. So this is a non-theological, non-denominational channel. You will hear us on this channel say, this is the evidence. This is the discovery that was made, or this is what the text says, whatever it is. And here is the argument on this side. Here is the argument on this side. Here is the evidence that we have. Here is what the scholarship says. Here is a very bad argument being made. Here are a couple of different good arguments that being made. And I think more scholars like this argument than this one. So we'll try to give you the landscape of what scholarship says about a particular issue, a verse or a discovery or whatever. Our job is to inform you about what's been discovered or what's being said by competent scholars about something, and give that to you. And then what you do with that is up to you. But we're
Yeah.
just trying to give you credible, responsible, scholarly information about things. Our job is not to try to convince you theologically or to convert you or to deconvert you. We're not interested in that at all. That's not what we do here. We want this to be, hopefully not the only, reliable source for public information about issues dealing with the Bible and
And
archaeology.
Bible
And
and
archaeology.
archaeology. Yeah, and a small, like, again, a little sales pitch here again for the class. The lands of the Bible, this is what's going on in the Cities of the Bible class, or in Bob's book, Cities That Built the Bible. We want to lean into the connectedness of all of these places. And
Right.
so if you're thinking like, yeah, why are you talking sometimes about Greece or Rome? Because there's connections between those peoples, between the texts, between the cultures there. So when we're going through that top 10 list, that's why some of those things came in. I think some of them, maybe make more immediate sense to people if we're doing something like some of those finds of Ramses. And be like, oh yeah, Egypt, okay, I can see the connection here. But then
Right.
for something like the shipwreck, people are like, why, how does the shipwreck's not there to prove or to disprove the Bible, but it's telling us something really important about the trade networks and the
Right.
connections and the lives of the people that
Right.
are going on, that we're turning towards things that became the book that became the Bible. So all of fleshing that out, which is why we do such a wide scatter of topics, that we want to go all over the place, because those things come together. And yeah, our hope is we're not here just for people that have faith or don't. We want to make material and talk about topics
Right.
that can be appealing to anyone. And you may not love all of it, because sometimes you may hope, like, I would like you to say that this proves something.
Right.
And we may not go there, because there's a
Right.
lot of interpretation that goes on in archaeology, which I think people don't think about a lot, because
Right.
the simplest way is to say, we found this, it proves that. But that's almost never the case.
What the hardest thing for students in my classes to learn is to live in ambiguity. Nobody likes to live in the gray
Yeah.
area. It's hard. Everybody likes black or white. What is this? Um, you have to learn to understand that we don't know all of the answers. And so, yes, we found a shipwreck. And no, that doesn't prove if, King David existed or not, or if King Solomon was real. What it shows us is that there were merchant ships on the. So when we hear a story about Jonah, it doesn't prove if the Jonah story is true, but what it does tell us is that the idea of Jonah jumping on a ship to sail across the Mediterranean was a legit thing. That wasn't a phone, that was something that could be done. Or Paul hopping on a ship, getting
Yeah.
passage on a ship crossing the Mediterranean. Oh, and by the way, this is scary because not all ships make it across the Mediterranean. This is a gamble, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a real thing. It's not something that, oh, he just made that up. Ships don't cross the Mediterranean. Yeah, they do, and sometimes they sink. And so that trade drives a lot of these things, right? That you had to have a decent navy, that you had to have good trade networks. That's how the Phoenicians became the Phoenicians, right? So we're trying to illuminate the ancient world to provide context. And then if you're a confessional person, you can say, oh, the Bible that I'm reading makes a little more sense today than it did yesterday. That's the service we're trying to provide.
Yeah, that's our hope. So if you
Right.
like that kind of stuff, stay tuned, stay around. That's what we're here for. And we don't normally get into the weeds in the comments to go back and forth with everyone, because if that's your approach, and if you're like, I'm looking for material that's going to go this way, that's not who we are. And so we hope you enjoy the stuff, but if not, not. If you do, then you do. Bob, we have a question here in the chat. Want to do one here, and then we're going to jump onto a Patreon question. This question comes from Zictomorph. Wilderness of Sin versus Zin. Both places where water comes from rock. Do you consider these parallel traditions or just something that happens twice? How similar are the words? So a little bit of I think there could be a lot of ways that this answer could potentially go, because this is talking about the Moses striking of the rock stories and the production of water. And so I'm assuming, are you pulling up Accordance right now to check our references
Yeah,
here?
yeah, they are given as two different words, sin and zin. And what I'm trying to look up is my accordance is down here, but let me call it up real quick. Sin and zin are given as two different words and are thus given as two different places. Um, the question is going to be whether or not, because you have a Sinai tradition and a Mount Horeb
Horeb.
tradition, the question is whether or not this was originally one tradition, like, we say that there was one, call it a Sinai tradition, that was split into a Sinai and a Horeb tradition that was then reassimilated into a singular tradition. They just had two names for the mountain. Is that the similar thing going on with the wilderness of, it was one wilderness that got, because it's a sibilant, right? For those of you who don't know, sibilants are the S sounds. So sin, zin, sin, shin, samek,
Same.
zin, the tzadi can be in there. These are all called sibilants. In fact, there's a very famous story in the battle in Joshua when they used it for a password. They said shibboleth and they said sibboleth, and they knew they couldn't say it because they didn't say it right, so they killed them.
Great West Wing
By
reference
the
right
way,
there,
there's a
too.
famous online internet tech password company called Shibboleth right now. We
Shibboleth.
used to use it anyways. That's a sibilant, is a S sounding word. So was it originally one place, but someplace in the text they spelled it zin, and someplace else they spelled it sin, and it correlated with the two different, and then it came back. This one stayed separate. So the tradition is that it's two separate places, and that became the tradition. And since we don't have any evidence for the Exodus or the wandering in the desert, we just have the literary tradition. You have it down as two separate places. Um, it is also not uncommon for the same trope or the same story to be told repeatedly in different situations. And
Mm-hmm.
the most famous one is the story where, for lack of better words, where Moses, pardon me,
Sister wife traditions.
yeah, the sister wife traditions,
Yeah. With
where he
Abram.
pimps out his wife
Yeah.
basically, and he says, "Hey, if anybody asks, um, say you're my sister, not my wife," which is technically true. So he's not really lying. Uh, and
But
you
maybe
have
not
this
something he
happening.
wants
So
to fully
it's
admit to
happens
either.
with
Yeah. Abram.
Abraham and Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
It happens with Isaac
Isaac.
and Rebecca,
I think that's it.
and then it happens with the Pharaoh twice, and I think with like
With Abimelech.
Abimelech once, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you get the same story told three different times in different situations, and it's like, all right, now either there's a problem with Israelite patriarchs pimping out their wives. This is like a standard customary thing to do, or it's like I do when when I go fishing with my dad, and he'll tell, oh, at one time Marty went up, my uncle Marty went up and did this, and I said, that wasn't Marty, that was Kurt. And he'll be like, oh yeah, it was Kurt, that's right, I forget, but here, so he tells the story, he just forgets who it took place with.
Yeah.
And you have that kind of situation, right? I don't want to pick on my dad. I do the same thing. I tell the story, but I forget who the story involved. But anyways, it's something that we all do. It's a standard thing in storytelling, right? We forget who was involved, but we know that the story's really good, so we tell it anyway.
Yeah.
That might be what's going on in the Desert of Sin and Desert of Zen thing.
So yeah,
What
Zictomorph.
do you got?
I think I would say that feels right. Like it potentially with that dueling of the Sinai and Horeb. Um, I don't know. That sounds like a good starting point. and there can be the danger sometimes with the closeness of the words. I know some people will have the argument similar to like the parallelomania, where they're,
Right.
oh, there's a similarity between these mythologies, so they must be connected. And sometimes people will make the same argument with words that are close, of like, okay, we might be construing a connection here that may not be there, and sin and zin may fall into, yeah, the words drift apart, or there's just a similarity and we're seeing on. I'd be interested to see. I'm going to say I'm going to do some looking here to see if there's some good literature that comes out, because I'm sure there's been some good stuff that's been written on this. And if we find something good, this can be one of those episodes that we come back to. So Zictomorph, thank you so much for
Mhm.
your question. George, thank you for your support. We really appreciate it. Before we come back to Tim and Constellation Pegasus here, I want to jump to a question from Amanda that came to us on Patreon. Amanda, I want to thank you for your question there. If you want to make sure that you can get questions into a free for all, or if you have questions that you just want to send us outside of a free for all, if you join us on Patreon, you can do that. You can submit questions in advance of a live, or you can also just send us messages that we'll respond to, say, yep, here's what we find, or here's what we could see on this, resource recommendations, all that kind of stuff. Amanda's question is, Susan Ackerman wrote about Jacob. I love Susan Ackerman. So whenever a
So do
question
I.
starts off with a reference to Susan Ackerman, you know it's going to be good.
Yeah,
Amanda always has great
Susan's the
questions.
best. Susan is the best.
Susan Ackerman wrote about Jacob sacrificing a goat to induce a dream at Bethel in Genesis 28. Could you talk about dream incubation in the Old Testament and some of the techniques that are used? So, before we jump into that, I think the article, or it's a book chapter by
Right.
Susan Ackerman called The Deception of Isaac, Jacob's Dream at Bethel, and Incubation on an Animal Skin in the edited volume, Priesthood and Cult in Ancient Israel. It's a really great read if you're looking for some more here.
Right.
But could we start by unpacking some of the terms that may be unfamiliar to people in this question, Bob? Let's start with dream incubation. What
Okay.
is dream incubation?
Right. So dream incubation isn't unique to ancient Israel. It's a process not dissimilar to what a mother hen does with an egg, right? A mother hen sits on an egg and gets it to just the right temperature so that the egg will develop and become viable. Essentially, puts it in a dark, warm situation so that some kind of action, in this case, development and life, hatching, can take place. And what you did in antiquity, and the number one example was with the deity Asclepius or
Mm-hmm.
Asclepius. At a temple of Asclepius, this was the Greek god of healing. You wanted to go, your hand didn't work. You broke your hand, or there was something wrong with your hand. And so what you would do is you would make, depending on how much money you had, you would make it out of clay or out of silver or bronze, gold, whatever. And you would go and you would make a model of whatever body part you wanted Asclepius to heal. And so you find a lot of hands, you find a lot of ankles and feet. You can imagine, and this is absolutely true, the other kinds of body parts that you would find presented at the temple.
Lots of
We'll just leave it at
fertility
that.
concerns. Let's say fertility concerns. Lots of
all
fertility
all of the
concerns.
things that you still see advertising today on television during football games, they were having these concerns as well. You would take this votive offering, this replica, whatever, and they would set it there, and then you needed to prepare for the god Asclepius to come to you, and the god Asclepius would come to you in a dream.
Mm-hmm.
So you needed to prepare for the deity to visit you in the dream. How do you do that? You had to ritually purify yourself, and this often involved all of the same things. You would bathe yourselves, wash yourselves, physically purify yourself. You would often either fast or you would eat some kind of purifying meal.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you would do is you would bury yourself, some kind of catabasis, right? You would go often next to the temple. You would go under the ground, which is essentially a sensory deprivation technique, right? You would go into a cave or a hole dug under the ground, which cuts off all the light, cuts off all the sound, and you would lie there. So it's like the an egg under the mother hen, right? You're putting yourself into a position where you are ritually pure, you are starving, right? Or you are fasting, and you are preparing yourself. You're cutting off all other sensories. And so now the deity can enter you during the dream and will fix whatever it is. And we actually have texts,
Yeah.
written texts of people describing the dreams that they have and how Asclepius and his snake comes in and fixes these things. So this is incubation, the process of preparing yourself, going under the ground into these things, and preparing yourself for the dream in which the deity would visit you in the dream. And it's very often a fertility blessing, right?
Yes.
These, that's, fix my hand or fix my foot or whatever, fix my hearing, something like that. Sometimes you see ears, but more often than not, it was a fertility thing.
And so people here that know this story are probably thinking like, okay, Genesis 28, I don't remember any undergroundness. So there's some differences in this with Susan Ackerman's reading here of, is Jacob
But
going underground or not?
but he's in the desert.
Right.
So when you're in the quiet of the desert with, and you have the rock and he's doing some kind of preparation. He's laying himself out in the desert. So it's not like he's in the city. Remember, he goes to the other side of the river. He
Yeah.
removes himself from the rest of the people, and then he takes the rock. And so he does make preparations. He didn't do it in the Greek style of going underground,
Right. There's a slight difference with
but
that.
he isolates himself.
Yeah. And I think when we're talking through some of the common tropes here of the
Right,
dreams, because then we have that dream, and people are probably most familiar with, oh, there's the ladder. Jacob's ladder shows up here, and
right.
these people coming up and down. And then if we're thinking of the fertility concern, and you're like, well, okay, could we break out here? Because a part of this dream is that your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. So, Bob, if Jacob is potentially partaking in some dream incubation here, going out, isolating, doing some preparation, Ackerman argues that some of the skins, the animal skins from the previous story, may be connected with this as well. And then in this dream, we have a vision and then an interpretation. And a part of this is like the dust of the earth. Is any of this connected to some of the, what healing? Is there any healing that's going on in this dream that Jacob might be having?
It's how graphic do we want to get with
Hey,
the with
it's a free for all live. I feel like we're
it's when you have a patriarch lying on his back having a dream in which a ladder is being projected up into the sky with angels coming up and down the ladder. And the dream is so guy laying on his back, ladder going up into the sky, and angels coming up and down. I don't want to do all the hand motions. Angels coming down up on the ladder, and this is a fertility dream. You can understand how somebody either in antiquity or today can see this as a potential blessing, as a potential visit from the deity saying, you are going to have lots of kids. This is
yeah.
going to be okay. And how Jacob would stand up in the morning and say, I was certainly visited by the deity in a dream, and I'm going to stand this rock that I was using from it. This is going to become a matseba, right? He's going to
Mm-hmm.
stand it up, he's going to anoint it, and he's going to say, this is a holy place. Peniel, I think he called it. Was that the Peniel story, or was it a
No,
different
this
one?
is this is
That
the
was the wrestling.
yeah, because this
Yeah,
becomes the setup for Bethel, and this is the
for
house.
Bethel.
Surely
Yeah,
this is the
that's what it was,
house of
Bethel.
God, and I
So
didn't
he
know it.
yeah. So he sets it up there, but this is where he has this encounter with the deity who makes this blessing. And remember, you had this something similar with Abraham time ago, which also involved a part of the male anatomy involved with fertility, right? The circumcision. So it's the promise is you will circumcise every male so that every time a Hebrew male goes to do the thing that causes procreation, you remember the covenant with the deity. And so, yeah, I think they are related. And I think it's these preparations for dreams, for visitations from the deity. There are these preparations, there's incubations, there's, you have to want, sometimes you have stories of, pardon me, sometimes you have stories of the deities coming and you didn't expect it. But other times you have stories where people want the deity to come.
Yeah,
They're isolating themselves, they're taking the preparations, and then they're given the fertility dream, or they're given the thing that they wanted the deity to do, and then they honor. That's the other thing you have to do in both traditions is when the deity comes and visits you, You usually go and offer a sacrifice, or you make some kind of promise to continue to worship the deity.
Well, and the honoring part in this one is, I think, one of my favorite parts about the story, outside of the odd, how much do you want to read into the dream, is then in that end when Jacob does this honoring, it's the, if you do
Correct.
and this, then I will. So I've had this dream. I say that this is the house of God, and I'll strike a deal with you, but I'm putting the conditions on you in this instance, which is such an interesting flip for the
Yeah,
businessman that he is showing his hand right here of like,
right.
yeah, I'll make a deal, but I've got some caveats. And if these aren't
Yeah.
fulfilled, then I'm going to move along. Amanda, this is one, this article and this chapter are great. We're going to do, I think we want to do a bonus podcast on this, reading through the story more fully, because we have some more questions we're going to come to here. So, Amanda, I'd say stay tuned for a Patreon bonus podcast talking
Yeah.
about this article that I'm going to do with Mary Kate, because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in this one.
Keep in mind that I wrote about this in my Melchizedek book, that one of the conditions was if I return in peace.
Mm-hmm.
And this in peace is a way that you can say b'shalom, right? In peace. And you get another passage where he arrives to Shechem, a city of Shalem. And people like to interpret that in peace. And that's not how you say, this is how you say in peace. So I talk about this. By the way, he says, if you allow me to return in peace, and if I'm unharmed, and then I will tithe, and then
Mm-hmm.
I will do this. But nowhere in the Hebrew Bible does it say that he actually fulfills his end of the bargain. God brings him back in peace, but nowhere does the Bible say. So in Jubilees, during this part of the story, you actually get several places where the text says, and then Jacob stopped and praised the Lord and offered a sacrifice. So Jubilees fixes this problem by adding in all of Jacob's fulfillments of his end of this conditional promise.
Wrapping us back around to one of our first questions here, what do we do when
Right.
the text doesn't seem to follow through on what it is? Yeah, if you're Jubilees, you just say, oh, yes, it did do that. And we have the
Yeah.
answer right here. So,
Except,
Amanda, thank you so much for your question. We're going to
right.
jump to a question from Tim here in the chat, Bob. Tim says, in Ugarit, there was Baal Hadad and Akkad. Carthage worshipped Baal Harmon and Melkart. Why do scholars think Melkart is based on Baal, not Akkad? Akkad seems to share traits with Greek Melkarts. So a question here on deities and association between this, which can be a fraught topic that there can be large arguments on, with scholarly disagreement on
Right.
connections between deities because of shared traits or relationships with other deities. I think one that always comes to mind for me is the, when is it Anat, or is it Asherah, or is it Astarte, or is it when we have one of these deities that seems to be moving through, when are they different, when are they the same? So, Bob, do you have a thought here on why do scholars think Melkart is based on Baal, not Akkad?
The short answer is I'm going to have to go look this one up. I'm trying to look at it very quickly, and maybe some Ugaritic expert knows this one off the top of their head. I do know the example that you just gave of Asherah and Anat. Um, this is true in Greek mythology as well. Sometimes you just get two different myths, like I mentioned earlier, where the stories are similar, but the names are changed, and they just insert one over the other. And a lot of times, like I said with the sin and Zin thing, um, they're done because the names are phonetically similar. So the names sound the same, or they're alliterative, or they have a couple of similar consonants, and somebody just told the story differently or wrote the story differently. Other times you just have similar attributes, but I don't know. That I don't want to speculate. This is me just going through the preliminary things of what I would look up. So I appreciate the question, but I'm going to have to do some homework because I don't want
Yeah,
to speak
we don't want to
when I
speak out
don't
of
know.
turn. And it's
Right.
something I'd say too with this one. I mean, I'm thinking through, having worked some before with Queen of Heaven materials in Jeremiah, that there can be some pushback from some scholars in trying to establish potential connections between deities of different places. I mean, and this goes back towards Susan Ackerman again, that sometimes in leaning towards trying to push this understanding of how these things might be connected in name or deity can cause us to miss the broader sense of who that was for the people and what the people were doing with that individual deity by trying to leaning towards that parallels of seeing these things
Right.
together, that the identity pursuit can sometimes suppress the focus of what else is happening with these. So if you're looking, Tim, for some things, that might be something you're going to come across if you're trying to find potential connections between these, that some people will push back on the question as a whole and say, we can never know if they were connected or not, or how this came through, getting towards stuff like from trade or how these stories may have come across, and in what time period. But Tim, if we find anything good,
Right.
we'll let you know in the future,
Right.
that we can come
I'm, and
back
I'm not,
around.
and I'm not just saying that to get you to come back next week. I genuinely don't know the answer, and I'm going to look it up, and I'm going to try to do the responsible thing and say I don't know,
Yeah,
and
well,
try
and
to get you to come back next week.
we're happy, as you said. We're not overly formal, and a part of that is the willingness to say, like, if we don't know, yeah, we're going to tell
Yeah.
you
No.
this is one that I don't know. And Bob, yeah, if you
Yeah.
don't know, we'll look. We're always happy to look. So thank you, Tim, for your question there. I think that's a helpful one to maybe we'll keep in the pocket. If we find anything good, we'll be sure to include it in next month's Bible and Archaeology free for all. Or if there's anything that's like outstanding that we can find right away, something might come to you sooner.
Right.
Well, Bob, I think for today, we're coming towards the end of our time here. So
Yeah.
I want to do the quick wrap ups. Thank yous to everyone who came in today that joined us live. If you're listening
Yeah.
to this on replay, if you find us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, we want to thank you for listening in. Next week, we'll be back to, a regular non-live podcast. We have a great interview that Bob did with Bill Schneidewin at SBL that will be coming out for you next week. So come in. Bill's talking about his new book. It's a great interview that I think you're all going to really, really like. So
Yeah.
that's what we've got some good stuff coming for you this month. We've got
Right.
good stuff coming for you every month, but there's lots of ways to be in touch with us. If you have questions, you can always send us an email at bible-archaeology@uiowa.edu. You can leave a comment underneath the video. You can leave a comment on the podcast episode. You can come join us on Patreon and send us questions there. We love to hear from you. If there's topics, if there's questions that you want us to cover over the coming year, reach out, let us know. If we missed something, do the same. Reach out and let us know. We want to make sure that we can cover the stuff that you want. But Bob, for today, I think that we're going to wrap up here. And yes, there was a great Hanukkah podcast we did with Dr. Atkinson that was very enjoyable up at UNI. I didn't mention the fact that, UNI and Iowa were going to play a basketball game and that we happily won that basketball game, women's Hawkeye basketball. Let's go. So, yeah, for everyone who maybe wasn't here last year, we are proud Hawkeye basketball fans. So as that comes along, you'll be hearing from us on that. But for today, Bob, thank you so much for taking the time. Anything you want to mention here at the end? Anything we didn't
I
get
just
to?
wanted to say one last thing. We crossed 2 million views this past year, and I think was it you the one saying, Jordan, that 1 million of those came this past year?
Mm-hmm.
So we crossed the 2 million view platform this year, and 1 million of those came in 2024. It was a tremendous year of growth for us, and we have no one to thank but you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being such strong supporters of this channel. Again, I just wish all of you everything the best and a continued bright and happy new year for 2025.
Well, for all of us here at Bible and Archaeology, I'm Jordan Jones. Until next time.